The cost of housing development is not just materials and labour, but also land purchase, infrastructure services like electricity, water and sewer, and connectivity to transportation systems, as well as property taxes. This is one of the reasons that the Housing Action Plan included a Housing Hub team to coordinate these committed actions. Question for the Minister of Social Development and Housing. What direction have you given your Housing Hub team to work collaboratively with other departments and municipal government to make housing development more cost-effective?
The Honourable Minister of Social Development and Housing.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. And as we are all aware in this legislature and right across the province, but housing, it is front and centre. It's certainly front and centre in our department as far as priority is concerned. There has been, without a doubt, progress made, and I do give credit to the former administration. You look at the present 366 units that are under construction that within the next number of months will be available for occupancy. Those units were initiated by the former administration and are being carried on by ours. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member from Charlottetown-Belvedere and the Opposition House Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, unfortunately, I'm not hearing that there is an approach for collaborative work, so perhaps I'll ask a different question to a different minister. Question for the Minister of Transportation, Infrastructure and Energy. Has your department developed a registry of provincially owned land that could be available for housing development? And if so, is this registry available to the public?
The Honourable Minister from Transportation, Infrastructure and Energy.
Well, we have all kinds of land inside of our inventory, and the purpose of the land is there's a multitude of reasons why we would hold land. Sometimes we're holding land for future road expansion. Sometimes we're holding land because it's protected. Sometimes we're holding land because it went to tax sale and nobody bought it and we just absorbed it. So yeah, of course there's land that's available to the Minister's Department to access. A little more difficult if we were to go to the public. We have to go through a duty to consult and those natures, but the door isn't closed for anybody who comes forward to us with a plan that makes sense. We won't close the door on anything. So if you had some recommendations of piece of land you want to bring forward, then by all means bring them forward.
The Honourable Member from Charlottetown-Belvedere and the Opposition House Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Another question for the Minister of Transportation, Infrastructure and Energy. Are you planning on investing in transportation and infrastructure needs for developers to help keep that per door cost of housing options lower and therefore affordable?
The Honourable Minister of Transportation, Infrastructure and Energy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm not sure what type of things at my department that we would implement. We work with developers all the time. There's usually a stack of development requests on my desk when I get in at the first of the week for people that are looking to start subdivisions and they need to access the roads and they need permission to get on. And sometimes they're looking for what requirements they need so that we can take over the roads so they build them to our standards. But you know, if you could be a little more specific what you're looking for, we help on the road side, but if there's something else you're looking for, I'll entertain it.
The Honourable Member from Charlottetown-Belvedere and the Opposition House Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I appreciate the opportunity to ask a follow-up. Minister, we know that the per-door cost of housing options, as I mentioned earlier, you know, the more the costs are that need to be incurred in terms of making that sort of drive ready, it adds to the door cost. So one of the things that's been asked by developers is there any way the Department of Transportation and Infrastructure can help with offsetting that cost? So where you are doing that work, is there any way that it's in your budget, Minister, that you would be able to provide that as part of the investment into the development?
The Honourable Minister of Transportation, Infrastructure and Energy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So, yeah, I guess it's a good question. I mean, I can't give you the answer for sure. I mean, it's something that I'd have to go back through in the department and see what we could allocate for budget and how many of these requests we'd be looking at and where they would be and those types of things. But I don't close the door on any good idea, so it's a good idea. And if you can send developers who have a specific ask in a specific location, then I'll gladly bring it forward to the staff to entertain. And I mean, I really can't commit to much more than that without knowing, but by all means keep them coming and we'll do what we can to help out.
The honourable member from Charlottetown-Belvedere and the opposition House Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I really appreciate that answer, Minister. Thanks very much. Moving on to another set, however. In recent discussions with the Housing Hub team, we discussed a proposal for a significant affordable housing development on government-owned land east of Charlottetown next to Hillsborough Park. It's approximately 60 to 70 acres. The Hub team indicated that this was the last large parcel of land the province owned in or near the city limits, and it should be kept available for something else, just in case. So a question for the Minister of Social Development and Housing: what are you keeping it for, if not for housing development in a housing crisis?
The Honourable Minister of Social Development and Housing.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the member for the question. With regard to the property that the member is speaking about, I'll be honest, I'm not aware that it is being kept. I know that there are other initiatives that other departments in government are looking at, but with that, we are not going to rule anything out as far as potential development sites. I think just to follow up, and the member accurately pointed out, King Square, public property that a housing initiative development is taking place on. Another example is Pioneer Drive. With regard to areas across the province, I have had discussions personally with municipalities of potential land that would be available, not necessarily owned by the province of PEI, but that would be owned by the municipality, where housing developments could take place on.
The honourable member from Charlottetown-Belvedere and the opposition House Leader.
I have heard from more than one local developer who has been frustrated by the Housing Hub team acting as gatekeepers and turning down requests for meetings to discuss creative and innovative proposals for affordable housing developments that we urgently need. Question for the Minister of Social Development and Housing: why does your department keep saying no to private developers who are prepared to invest their own funds on shovel-ready projects?
The honourable member, Minister from Social Development and Housing.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I would put out to the member, either I would be more than happy to sit down with her or the developers if they contact me directly with concerns that she has raised. Thank you.
The honourable member from Charlottetown-Belvedere and the opposition House Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Minister, that does raise the question as to the function of the Housing Hub team, if we can just go directly to you with those questions. Earlier, I talked about infrastructure as part of the housing development cost, along with land. These are both areas that the provincial government can assist with via one-off capital or operational investment that empowers private development and helps reduce the costs to provide affordable housing. It's not even that creative or innovative. It's best practice in other jurisdictions and in previous housing developments, including those developed during the previous administration. Question for the Minister of Social Development and Housing: how can you meet your Housing Action Plan commitment to develop new affordable housing capacity if you aren't prepared to leverage these available resources?
The Honourable Minister of Social Development and Housing.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Speaker. And yes, we're prepared to leverage, look at whatever resources that are available. Certainly working across, not only across department lines, the great announcements that my colleague, the Minister of Economic Development and Tourism, has made in the last couple of weeks, but with municipalities across the province as well. I'd also like to just very briefly, Mr. Speaker, go back to the Housing Hub and the staff members in my department. I know the tremendous commitment that they have, the demands that they have, and I want to state publicly that I, as Minister, certainly appreciate that, but I do want to reiterate to the Minister as well.
The honourable member from Charlottetown-Belvedere and the opposition House Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. One of the key action items in the Housing Action Plan appears under the leadership commitment that a Cabinet Committee will lead government's approach to housing across the province. Question for the Minister of Social Development and Housing: how often does that Cabinet Committee meet and who is the chair?
The Honourable Minister of Social Development and Housing.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I will have to take that question under notice, and I will be back to the legislature the first of the week, next week.
The Honourable member from Charlottetown-Belvedere and the opposition House Leader.
Well, I would certainly hope that the Minister of Social Development and Housing is on the Cabinet Committee for Housing. My final question on this topic, Mr. Speaker, when will we see the evaluation and public reporting framework for the Housing Action Plan as committed to earlier this year?
The Honourable Minister of Social Development and Housing.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And just the report card, the evaluation, if you like, with regard to the Housing Action Plan is in the works. It will be reviewed, and I will be tabling that in the legislature. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.